Hello, we are the Global Super Solvers. Throughout this presentation, we will discuss the various elements of climate change in Bangladesh.
Climate change and dimensions in Bangladesh. Weather and climate are directly related to atmospheric conditions and their interactions with biological, chemical, and physical factors on Earth's atmospheric, hydrospheric, lithospheric, and biospheric planes. Ecological components fundamentally impact other dimensions, such as societies, cultures, politics, and economies in developing countries on Earth. Greenhouse effect and global warming in Bangladesh. There's increased retention of greenhouse gases, which increases solar energy, a shortwave radiation, which diminishes the ozone layer, and an increased infrared longwave radiation, in which heat becomes trapped in the atmosphere. This warmer atmosphere equals a warmer Earth surface. In Bangladesh, another climate change dimension is the oceans and rising sea levels. Earth's atmospheric increase in temperature and carbon dioxide transmit into the oceans, melting large sheets of ice. The diffusion of carbon dioxide into the ocean increases its acidity while increasing its temperature. Warm oceans means less sea ice, melting ice and rising sea levels. In Bangladesh, there are many exposures to hazards. Human geography features in Bangladesh include 150 million human population, making Bangladesh the most populous dense country in the world. In the southern region of Bangladesh, there is an ocean coastline along the Bay of Bengal. The North India Ocean is notorious for its typhoons and its impacts as a result of climate change. Also in the northern region of Bangladesh, there is a lot of tectonic plate movement. The convergence of Indo-Australian and Eurasian plates creates many earthquakes and other natural catastrophes to occur. Another human social factor to consider in Bangladesh is the economy, in which only a $958 gross domestic product per capita is assumed on a fiscal year. With so many poor people, this creates a very vulnerable population. With greater amounts of sun energy, this hazard will exacerbate the greenhouse effect and ozone depletion. This exposure will occur because Bangladesh is in a tropical region with large amounts of exposure to UV radiation. A vulnerability is then occurring because of the high risk of developing respiratory and skin diseases, such as cancer. This ecological change with more sun energy will expose Bangladesh, particularly in high altitudes, for opportunity to innovate with photovoltaic solar cells and panels. With greater sun exposures in Bangladesh, this will create ecological changes as a result of the solar radiation on Earth's surface. This affecting societal health will create concerns in which need to be addressed by public policy and other implementations in anticipation of developing an infrastructurally sound energy grid that is economically sustainable and both resilient, adaptive, and mitigative.
The next one is land erosion and soil saturation. The warming temperature has caused melting snow caps and the rising sea level. The vulnerability to that are landslides, floods, and runoff. They impacted the economic because it has impacted agriculture due to land change. For social, people have lost homes due to the loss of lands and they have no money to disperse new lands. Warming atmosphere. The greenhouse gas has caused Earth's surface temperatures rise. Low-lying country land will be flooded and be part of the sea. The economic opportunity is more shallow water can be converted to fishing habitat for food to sell. And the social opportunity is allowing indigenous people who have retained primitive skills to exercise them and prosper.
The reason cause the disappearing land is the V-shaped bay straight into the country's fan-shaped coastline. The vulnerability of the disappearing land are for social, it causes more deaths of people due to the loss of houses and lands. For economy, it poses the pressure for the government because the government needs to spend more money on rebuilding houses and increasing the speed of rescue. regular flow during the monsoon season, and during that time, the roads were damaged, so the transportation is slow and inefficient. The vulnerability of the flood is for economy, government need to spend money on rebuilding the bridge that can connect the eastern and western part. For social, it is really inconvenient for people due to the damage of the transportation. But the change of climate will also bring the opportunities for Bangladesh people. With the increasing average temperature and larger population, the economy will grow up by offering the low production costs and exporting the goods for like crops for the other countries.
As discussed earlier, the warming of the earth has caused glacial melt and effectively sea level rise. Bangladesh is especially at risk as it is an extremely low-lying coastal country. Sea level rise threatens to engulf the coastal lands, which are an important source of agriculture for Bangladesh, having 30% of the farmable land. This rise in sea level may produce, however, an opportunity in aquaculture. Aquaculture is nothing new to Bangladesh. According to the UN, Bangladesh is a world leader in inland fisheries. This increase in sea level may offer Bangladesh a chance to expand this source of food production.
Drought is a big problem in Bangladesh, and there's a El Nino phenomenon which results from warm surface water development of the Pacific coast of the South America, influences the levels of rainfall in various areas of the earth, such as monsoon rainfall in Bangladesh. The link between rainfall and the sea surface temperature has been recommended as a potential cause of drought. Rising levels of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases has been recommended as cause of variations of rainfall that are characterized as climate change. There are strong evidences that climate change will change the rainfall pattern and consequently more frequent droughts are happened. Among the local level reasons are human-included alterations resulting from vegetation loss because of deforestation and overexploitation of resources. There's a huge area in Bangladesh is affected by the drought problem. In this case, people will migrate to other places and agricultural losses will influence the economics. For the drought opportunity, augmented inflows of Ganges from the upstream by changing the Ganges water sharing treaty will be the opportunity to help drought problem in Bangladesh. For the history of economic in Bangladesh, when the East India Company became the virtual ruler of Bengal, they are suffered from a system which touched their trades, their occupations, their lives so closely. The springs of their industry were stopped. The sources of their wealth dried up. The Muslim industry virtually disappeared as a result of British rule. For the current economy in Bangladesh, being situated in one of the most fertile regions on earth, agriculture plays a crucial role in Bangladesh. The economy is increasingly led by export-oriented industrialization. The Bangladesh textile industry is the second largest in the world. Due to the climate change, there are more frequent natural disasters. Rising sea level will flood the land and increase the salinity in the soil, causing lower crop yields.
To understand Bangladesh's fossil fuel use, we do not have to look that far as the current use is very similar. Most energy is produced by the renewable source of firewood. Fossil fuel was limited to kerosene, a primitive product derived from oil. Today, Bangladesh has benefited from the large deposits of natural gas in its earth and is currently the 7th largest natural gas producer in Asia. In 2012, they produced nearly 800 billion cubic feet of the product, all of which was totally domestically consumed. Oil is both produced and imported, and there is a trend towards oil use, and it is on the rise. Currently, 62% of the population has access to the grid, leaving a large portion still using renewable firewood as a source of energy. There is currently plans to build a nuclear power plant in order to generate a new form of energy. It is important to note that the industrial consumption greatly outweighs personal use, as much of the people still live primitively without much access to electricity. To put Bangladesh's fossil fuel use into focus, we'll compare it to the United States. Bangladesh, per capita, they generate 220 kilowatt hours. In the U.S., that works out to be about 57 barrels of oil per person. However, in Bangladesh, there is about a comparative 1 barrel of oil to 1 person per year. With this in mind, it is obvious that Bangladesh is a very small producer of greenhouse gases. Bangladesh is very poor in its forest management. With one of the highest population densities, vacant land is scarce, and new land is always trying to be generated. This means that there is a loss of 2,000 hectares of forest per year. 90% of Bangladesh's forests have been cleared. This is one of the lowest rates in the world, with only 6.7% of the surface area being forest. In 1985, there were nearly 2 million square meters of forest, as compared to in 1996, 0.6 million square meters, and this trend has only continued downward. This need for industrial and residential land has caused Bangladesh to deplete its forests in order to stay competitive and fight the extreme poverty. Natural gas extraction is also the cause of thousands of miles of cleared forest. Although natural gas may burn clean, the depletion of forests leads to less CO2 control and increases erosion and mangrove depletion to add to the numerous environmental problems already faced by Bangladesh.
There are 4 groups of vulnerable populations to climate change. The first group is indigenous people. Indigenous people rely on agriculture and raising animals. Climate change has caused environmental damage, so there are huge impacts on their livelihood. And indigenous people are displaced and driven away from their homelands due to the rising sea level. The second group is poor people. Climate change has caused them food insecurity. Natural disasters force them to change their food habit. Also, since they don't have enough money, their houses are not steady. They are more susceptible to destructions due to the natural disasters. The third group is farmers. Farmers depend on their land and crops. The rising sea level have surrendered coastal agricultural land, particularly low-lying land. Even some lands can still be used for farming, but the rising temperature has caused the rise in insect infestation, crop and cattle disease. Very few crops can be grown under this weather condition. The last group is women. Male out-migration caused an increase in the number of female-headed households. After disasters hit, there are often inadequate facilities available for women to cope with their household tasks or to find shelter. Also, disaster relief efforts pay insufficient attention to women's reproductive and sexual health, and as a result, women's health suffers.
The carbon footprint of Bangladesh people is 0.6, while the US is 9.5. It means that most people in Bangladesh has less money to spend, so they will have less consumption, finally not produce too much waste. Most families members rely on public transportation or ride bicycle. So when they live at home, they cannot use vast amount of technology due to the low development, and they do not have the ability to eat a large sum of food. For different groups of people, women, most of them work at home and take care of their children, but men, they usually work in the urban places and do the farming work, and the poor people do not have enough money to support their life, and they usually suffer from hunger, and their carbon footprint is very low.
Climate change is a direct byproduct of anthropogenic development, which has resulted in an unsustainable world economy. The current status quo in Bangladesh and their trade-offs with climate change is that they're currently trying to combat poverty and unemployment through industrial development, which is not sustainable. They're using lots of biotechnology and synthetic chemicals to improve vegetable production. They're doing a lot of deforestation and modifying the land in ways which are not sustainable for its infrastructure, trying to maximize the productivity in agricultural fields. There's been over-harvesting of marine ecosystems to provide food security, which have been degrading as a result of flooding and tsunamis, and the extraction and burning of fossil fuels to provide energy for cities. Trade-offs for adaptation mitigation in Bangladesh. First of all, we have to localize and not globalize. This first trade-off will focus energies on community development. Trade-off number 2, political corruption must be eliminated. This will create effective leadership in which a revolution can begin, in which we can start mitigating and adapting to climate change. Trade-off number 3, investing in renewable energy development, not natural gas extraction and other fossil fuels. This is the only way to truly eliminate greenhouse gases. Trade-off number 4, natural resource infrastructure for resilience, not man-made devices. That means less concrete and using more native grasses and mangroves and other wetlands to try to protect against pollution and other climate changes. More philanthropic collaboration and international cooperation. Everyone must contribute to saving the planet. Collective action is the only way to success.
In May of 1992, the UNFCCC was founded. Eager to join, Bangladesh was registered June of 1992, finally being accepted in July of 1994. Bangladesh was very quick to join, and this displays the eagerness to collaborate in the UNFCCC to make change. Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change in the world, and although it's redundant, it cannot be overstated, as this fuels much of Bangladesh's intent in the UNFCCC. Bangladesh wanted to voice the effects of climate change in hopes to try and sway mitigation of these effects while hoping for help to adapt themselves for the climate change that they have experienced firsthand. Bangladesh is a developing country. They have not benefited from industry like well-developed countries have. Despite a low amount of greenhouse gas emissions, Bangladesh has been harmed by other countries' emissions. As such, Bangladesh is not swayed by economic factors. Their hope is simple: express the need for climate mitigation while looking for help from the international community to adapt. Bangladesh was on board with Kyoto. However, without the support of developed countries, there was not a chance to have a large impact on mitigation. With Bangladesh being one of the smallest emitters of greenhouse gases, them changing their ways would have virtually no impact on the climate. However, they hope to advocate on moral grounds that other countries that have a means to do something, do something. This is essentially the idea of like but different. We all have the same goal and must do the same thing. However, some of us must reduce our emissions more drastically than others. In the UNFCCC, Bangladesh is voicing the need, along with other least developed countries, for assistance to climate change. This includes moving refugees from low-lying lands that have been lost, the problem with food scarcity as floods and droughts have ravaged the country, and also deal with the problem of water scarcity, loss of property and life, and battling the insecurity of women. Bangladesh's stance in the UNFCCC is very clear and easy to understand. It has not been changed over time. The only thing that has changed is the intensity and the need for adaptation and mitigation as these conditions continue to worsen.
In the UNFCCC, Bangladesh is considered a least developed country, or LDC, or non-Annex 1. Bangladesh is excluded from Annex 1 and Annex 2 country requirements, however, is subject to a climate change policy plan known as a National Adaptation Program of Action, or NAPA, or NAPA, which addresses projects to implement Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, of the UNFCCC. This utilizes clean development mechanisms and other protocols of the Kyoto and UNFCCC measures. Bangladesh's National Adaptation Programs of Action in 2005 and 2009 emphasized scientific, political, and social dimensions to climate change policy implementations. These projects include sustainable development in communities, adaptive agriculture in delta regions, adaptive infrastructure on coasts and cities, and international collaboration in energy production. Bangladesh's National Adaptation Programs of Action differentiated in a couple different ways. NAPA in 2002 was an evaluation of greenhouse gas emissions, but in 2009 assessed the impacts and changes to climate in addition to reevaluating the country's emissions. Bangladesh has an initial national communication in which, in addition to the NAPAs, they draft a formal document for the Conference of Parties. Now, this is used to help further update the other countries and its measures for mitigation and adaptation in the country. In Bangladesh's initial national communication, it went ahead and conveyed that they had established a climate change unit. The government uses the Ministry of Environment and Forests to adopt climate change strategy and action plans, or BCCSAP, in order to start climate change trust funds, other types of resilience funds, and a multi-donor trust for philanthropists. Goals of the Bangladesh Climate Change Strategic Action Plan is to comply with the UNFCCC. Second goal is to have a 45% reduction in emissions by 2020, 95% reduction in greenhouse gases emitted by 2050, a fourth goal for food security, a fifth goal for public safety and health being ensured, and a sixth goal to continue collaborations and engage in diplomatic negotiations to mitigate and adapt to climate change. One program being implemented in Bangladesh is the Reducing Vulnerability to Climate Change. This program is implemented by a non-governmental organization known as CARE to promote climate change education on sustainable development and adaptation in communities. This knowledge being made available at the community level is great for climate change and is being modeled at international workshops. Additional climate change participation by Bangladesh includes the Prime Minister Begum Khalida Zia speaking at an international workshop in Dhaka in 2002. The workshop focused on capacity building for preparation of national adaptation programs and actions. Also, current Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina spoke at the UN Climate Summit of 2014 in New York, urging Annex II countries to support LDCs and reiterating Bangladesh's efforts for low-carbon climate resilience policy.
Why did Bangladesh have such involvements? As a seaside country, Bangladesh have a large impact by climate change, like the rising sea level, flood, warming atmosphere, and drought. So the living quality is reduced by climate change. The food insecurity due to the loss of land and houses are susceptible to the destruction caused by natural disasters.
Another reason is, as a least developed country, government do not have enough money to build infrastructure, but if joining the UNFCCC, government would invest more interest in building infrastructure and gain support from other countries.
Bangladesh's history and relations to current politics. It is ironic that Bangladesh has contributed little to the pollution that is linked to the rising temperature and sea levels, but will suffer the most from the consequences. In the current politics, Bangladesh is beginning to take actions for the adaptations to the climate change, together with actions and mitigate climate change. There are many adaptations under current politics compared to the earlier time, and Bangladesh government has developed many embankments and afforestation, and also developed the infrastructures. And for the cyclones, they develop many shelters, and they also develop many things to prevent the salinity in the soil and the flood.
In the future for Bangladesh, there is an overall objective to protect and improve the lives of the 10 climate vulnerable people in Bangladesh through climate change adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction measures. Specifically, the government of Bangladesh will have to implement the Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan effectively. The problem with Bangladesh in their future negotiations will be that they have very much at stake, however very little to bargain with except for a moral argument. Solution to this is that Bangladesh must continue to educate the international community on the importance of climate change and how it relates to them as well. Because Bangladesh cannot make a difference by changing just their own productions, they must convince other countries to do this as well. In the future, Bangladesh must continue to stress this issue and voice their opinion in international negotiations. They must engage in projects such as supporting agricultural adaptation for climate change, the Bangladesh Climate Change Resilience Fund, the Multi-Purpose Cyclone Shelter, and others like that. Overall, they must continue stressing this issue and not let it fall by the wayside until it becomes too big of a problem that there's nothing we can do.
The cost will include the BCCRF joining, and the cost of importing new techniques, and the cost of planting trees and building better living environment. Although it costs a lot, it brings many benefits for them. Government will gain support for the developed partners and have more ability to build new infrastructure. Also, the income of farmers will increase due to the usage of new techniques on growing crops and decrease the possibility of poor suffering from hunger.
The externalities game, which is a TEG game, I think it's kind of a model of the Kyoto Protocol. And I don't think it's a successful game because not everyone complied with the admission promise, although we made an agreement. So the non-Annex 1 country will be affected worse, and which caused them to get the really low points. For the recommendations associated with the game, Bangladesh is a part of non-Annex 1 countries, so they cannot make a big difference by changing their own productions. So the only way to solve the problem is to convince other countries to make a change, which like our recommendation said. The intergeneration equity game, the insights of the game, I think first generation does not care too much about the future generations, so they produce as much as they can, and so the future generation will end up like has no resource, no total capital to use, and especially for the non-Annex 1 country, they will be affected worst by other countries. And for the recommendations associated with the game, I think we have to like a climate change adaptation mitigation will help Bangladesh to emit less. And for the BCCRF, like I mentioned earlier, not me, my Tintin mentioned earlier, and shelter construction project and the reforestation project will be helpful to the further generations.
The global supersolver theory of justice is justice as fairness, which is the beneficial advancement for all people by mutualistic collaboration, in which social contracts to distribute goods are made. This establishes equal protection of and fair rights to liberty and nature, equal meaning being the same as others, and fair equaling a meritable opportunity exposure. Justice and equitable climate policy in Bangladesh would be where all people are treated equally and fairly, thus allowing more opportunities from exposures to the ecosystem and less marginalization. People exposed to hazards and that are more vulnerable can collectively organize to receive aid from others and their opportunities. The people who have the least will benefit the most, and the people who have the most will continue to benefit and may benefit in various new ways by assisting in trade to those who are less fortunate.
Recommendations have impacts on vulnerable people. Since there are many women households in Bangladesh, after disasters hits, there are often inadequate facilities available for women to cope with their household tasks or to find shelter. The recommendation of multi-purpose cyclone shelter construction project can help women to find a safe shelter after a disaster. Indigenous people in Bangladesh depend upon agriculture and raising animals. Some of them were driven away from their homelands due to the rising sea level. The recommendation of supporting agriculture adaptation to climate change can help them to continue grow crops under bad weather. Also, the recommendation of multi-purpose cyclone shelter construction project can help them to find shelter. Some people in Bangladesh have lost homes due to climate change. They don't have jobs, so they don't have any incomes. Then they became poor people. The recommendation of Bangladesh Climate Change Resilience Fund might provide funds to communities. Communities might either give poor people money to help them or give them jobs. Once they have income, then they can afford to buy houses or food.